The Wrong Place at the Right Time by Jackie Little Papercut. Episode 1 of the Manehattan verse. Act 3. Friendship is Magic. Once more they were in a lit area, perhaps a bit lighter than the last. There was no telling how long it would remain lit, though, and that thought spurred them on just a little faster, down a few different corridors. They were spearing into the room Daring had shown Twilight earlier that day. "All right, so where are they?" Twilight asked, looking around for the array of gems the books had shown. Nothing of the sort was visible, to her dismay. They must have been deeper in the museum. "Right here," Daring declared, picking up a rock and tossing it to Twilight. Twilight caught it in the bemused expression. "A rock?" she questioned, staring right at it. "The elements of harmony are a rock?" Daring shrugged. "Based on every record we could find, yeah. We concluded that these are definitely the elements of harmony. Take a closer look." She picked up the rest of the rocks and set them down in front of Twilight. Examining them, Twilight realized three things she had completely overlooked. First, these weren't just lumps of rock. They were almost completely spherical and perfectly smooth to the touch. Second, the only interruption to their uncannily precise shape was an impression in each, perfectly in the shape of the gems shown in the books. Third, there were 5 of them. "5?" Silver observed, raising an eyebrow. "I thought you said there were 6. "So, where's the last one?" Blossom Forth asked, looking at Daring. Twilight shook her head. "The book said, when the 5 are present, a spark will cause the 6th element to be revealed," she stated simply. "Trixie doesn't understand," said Trixie. "Neither do I, but I think I've got an idea. Stand back. I don't know what will happen." With a few gentle taps, Octavia drew the attention of the group. "Remember, what peace there may be in silence. Let Twilight concentrate," she said, ushering the other 4 back into the corridor. Twilight gave a grateful nod and began focusing her magic through the stones. Though they rustled and rolled under the exerted force, there wasn't much effect. Suddenly, just as the other 5 had disappeared from sight, a glittering darkness began to rise from the floor around the elements. It flickered, then began to swirl, sweeping them up. Twilight let out a cry of alarm. The rest turned around and came charging back, just in time to see Twilight lower her head and jump into the dark vortex. The vortex then seemed to collapse into itself like a dying star. For a moment, everything was sucked toward it, and then it was gone, leaving behind a large orb of darkness, like a hole in nothing. Within, distant points of light twinkled. "Oh, Celestia!" Octavia gasped. "It's full of stars!" Twilight opened her eyes and stood up, rubbing her head. Where am I?" She asked no pony in particular. She was outside. She could see that. A cold wind whipped through her mane and crouched down against it as best as she could, though it was little use on the cold surface below her. Glancing around, she saw that this surface came to an abrupt end not too far behind her. To her left was a wall. To her right was nothing. She then turned to stare down the ground below. But before she could look, her attention was drawn to the sound of hoofbeats close by. "I wouldn't do that," Nightmare Moon growled. "But there was nowhere else to go." "What have you done?" Twilight snapped as she glowered at the once princess. "Where are we?" "Curious, are you?" Nightmare Moon smirked. "I'm afraid that's none of your business, unless you would like me to teach you. Forget your frivolous quest, and I would be your mentor, just like Celestia was." Twilight dropped into her best fighting stance. Nightmare Moon merely laughed at this, and stopped with one hoof, causing the surface beneath Twilight to tremble, unbalancing her. "There's no point in fighting," she said calmly. "Your effort to restore the sun is a lost cause. I'll dispose of you, and when your allies arrive, I'll simply leave them trapped here forever with the elements they sought so desperately." Slowly, the look on her face took on a new, sinister sort of mirth. "Last chance. Join me and I'll spare them too. What do you say?" Twilight trembled as she picked herself up. I say, she snorted. Never! I won't give up! Not until I put a stop to your schemes once and for all! So be it, the dark mare declared, stepping forward. Behind her, Twilight glimpsed the elements, so close, almost within reach. At the next instant, Twilight realized she was being lifted into the air, seized in a deep blue magenta. Blossom Forth reached out with a hoof to touch the orb, cautiously. The leg easily passed into it, as though there was nothing there. There was a slight but noticeable chill to it, an eerily natural sensation. I'm going in, she said, stepping back and bracing herself. With a murmur of agreement, the rest stood at her side. Octavia pausing to let her cello against the display. As one, they lowered their heads and charged straight for the spear. Their progress was not so much as hindered, and in less than a second they reached the other end, or rather, they should have. Passing through the near side of the spear, however, proved to be very disorienting, and all five stumbled. Oh, cowboy! They found themselves in the streets of Manehattan, sky still as dark as when they left. The twinkling of stars now seemed to be reflected by the streets beneath them. All around them, buildings appeared to have been broken and ruined. Impossibly, dead trees, seeming centuries old, rose through the cracks and holes in the building. What is this? Auntie asked, gaping in horror. Daring shook her head. Nothing, she said. It's an illusion, a trick. It can't be real. Trixie tapped at the ground with a hoof. It feels real, she announced. But then, that's to be expected, isn't it? Blossom-Forth nodded. Yeah, well, whatever's happening, we've got bigger problems. Spread out, girls. The search is on. Twilight struggled against the magical hold, then squeezed her eyes shut as she began to cast a spell of her own. Nightmare Moon loosened her grip, only slightly, enough for Twilight to know she was bracing for an attack. But Twilight had something else in mind. She placed a thin, magical aura under Nightmare's, allowing her to slip free and land on her host, ready to fight back. Oh my, that was clever of you, Nightmare Moon commented. I see I'm going to have to be more direct. And why not? Celestia's playthings are mine now. So, it's time to play. She stepped forward slowly, and a series of magical orbs began to take form above her as she did. Twilight unconsciously backed away, until her hoof hit the edge. She tensed up, watching as the enormous mare slowly bore down on her. Then, halfway across the space between them, Nightmare Moon stopped. She raised her wings high above her as they could stretch, and then swept down again in a great flourish. As she did, though, the orbs streaked toward Twilight one by one, elongating into an arrow shape as they moved. Twilight leapt over the first arrow, and the second itself aimed at her, passing over her as the gravity pulled her out of its path. She hit the ground and rolled into a wall, getting out of the way of the third and fourth. As they passed, she sprang to her feet, only to see the fifth arrow bearing down on her. She cringed, trying to recall a shield spell, an absorption spell, or something, anything to save her from the impending strike. There was a flash of light, and Nightmare Moon drew back in shock as the arrow passed through nothing at all. Behind her, a confused Twilight Sparkle had appeared beside the elements. The dark mare turned to see her shake off her disorientation and began casting a spell on the stones. At once, Nightmare took shadow form again and floated back to the elements, reforming over them. Twilight ceased casting to gaze up at her, arcs of electricity bouncing from spear to spear. Without warning, a spark leapt to the distracted Twilight, glancing her with a force of her own magic. The unicorn was sent backwards, skidding across the surface below her until she felt herself leave the edge. Desperately, she reached out with her hooves and clung to it, barely pulling herself back up. No! No! Nightmare Moon commanded as the electricity continued to flow. Twilight grinned in triumph. That grin faded a second later as the sparks flickered pathetically out. But where's the sixth element? She protested. Cackling, Nightmare reared back up onto her hooves and stamped amid the elements. Twilight watched in horror, clinging to the ledge, as the 5 stones shattered, sending a cascade of shards tumbling to the streets below. "You little fool!" gloated the shouting mayor. "Thinking you could defeat me! Now, you will never see your princess or your son! The night will last forever!" Twilight couldn't respond. She couldn't speak. Those stones were the last hope for Ponykind, and now they were gone. Nightmare Moon was right. No matter what she did now, it was over. Before she could bow her head in defeat, however, a sound behind her drew her attention. "She's not over here!" called Daring Do, sweeping over a building complex, eyes scanning the streets. Blossomforth ascended along a skyscraper, peering in every window as she passed. "Not here either." A blast of magic cleared away a plant that was blocking the roof access of a university building. "Trixie has nothing to report," Trixie reported, stepping out onto the roof. "Nor I." Servant doing a perfectly good Blossomforth impersonation said, standing on top of the library. Octavia shook her head in frustration at her fruitless treks through the streets. Cutting through Central Park, she arrived at a great statue of Beethoven, and without a thought, hopped up onto it, searching to a skyline. She drew in a deep breath, as much as her lungs could hold, and bellowed at the top of her voice, "Twilight! Where are you?" Twilight's head turned automatically, seeking the source of the voice. Okay, once again, I have a few song lists here. Let's see. You could either go for Moonlight Destiny, or a personal favorite of mine, I just thought about it, Sonic King's Oversoul. Enjoy. She saw them all, frantically looking for her. For an instant, she wanted to call out to them to turn back, to give up, to save themselves. Though, of course, they never would. If there was any hope of that, they wouldn't have come this far, wouldn't have stood by her through the dangers they had already faced. As soon as she had thought of that, she gasped, her eyes widening as she finally understood what it had all meant. In spite of the victorious alicorn in front of her, Twilight grinned. "You just lost." The Dark One froze in place, fixing Twilight with a look of absolute uncertainty, regarding whether it should be amused or enraged. "Oh," she asked, striding forward, "and tell me, how do you propose to make good on that outrageous claim? The elements are gone, and you're barely holding on. I've beaten Celestia in every way!" "The elements aren't gone," Twilight explained simply, emulating a shrug as well as she could in her persistence. "What do you mean?" Nightmare Moon hissed, tendrils of the darkness that was her mane lashing out, sobbing just short of Twilight. "I've destroyed them! You don't know how to repair them! No one alive does!" Twilight shook her head, then raised her voice as loud as she could. "You think you can destroy the elements of harmony just like that? Well, you're wrong, because the elements of harmony are right here!" she yelled. Her voice carried through to the still air, to the searching ears, and to the heads below turned to her location. "Is that her?" "She's on top of the Inquine's Gate building." "Hold on, Twilight!" At the next second, 5 beacons of colored light shot up through the city. Nightmare Moon's pupils shrank as he began to step back, away from the display. "What?" Twilight only smirked and nodded. "Honeydew, who gave up her biggest secret to help her friends, represents the spirit of honesty," she declared. From a stream of fresh stone stars swirled up to surround the Pegasus, who gazed in awe as he hovered amid them. "I told you," she called back. "You can call me daring." "Trixie," Twilight continued, "who used comedy and humor to eliminate the shadow of terror, represents the spirit of laughter." On cue, a second stream flowed to the proud-looking blue unicorn, who flipped her mane in response. "If you think that was funny, you should be there for one of Trixie's tours," she remarked. "Blossomforth, who risked everything because she had faith in me, represents the spirit of loyalty," Twilight said confidently. The third stream reached Blossomforth as he smiled up at the unicorn. "And you did it and pulled it off. Fosterforth answered. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Twilight had heaved her torso onto the roof by now, and gestured with a hoof. Octavia, who helped and climbed to help us and scared, represents the spirit of kindness! The fourth stream collected around Octavia, who took a simple bow. And Auntie, who gave up something irreplaceable to give us all some hope, represents the spirit of generosity! Twilight finished, beaming as the fifth stream quickly slipped to Orange Serpent. Ah, could never give less than a mile, said the Earth Pony humbly, lowering her head with a smile. Twilight pointed a hoof at Nightmare Moon. The spirits of these 5 ponies got us through every challenge you threw at us, and that's why you lost. Nightmare Moon gasped. No! She cried. It can't be. I... Her look of horror quickly melted away, though, as he laughed loudly again. I still won. You don't have the 6th element. Your spark didn't work! Before Twilight had a chance to respond, Nightmare rushed forward and swatted her with a forehoof. She was knocked clear of the roof, with nothing left to grab onto, only able to hear the cackling of the mare above her as she fell. As the others gaped in horror, Derry-Doo and Blossomforth both darted toward Twilight, but they knew it was no use. They were too far away to have any hope of catching the unicorn. Suddenly, a 6th beacon erupted from Twilight's position. The falling mare slowed to a stop a few stories above street level, and then her direction began to reverse. The Earthbound ponies also found themselves lifted into the air, and the Pegasi felt a pleasant stillness overtake them as all 6 were drawn to the same point in the sky. Would you please let me finish? Now, as I was saying, it did work. A different kind of spark. Twilight patiently explained to the stunned Nightmare, then glanced back at the group. I felt it when I realized how happy I was to hear you, to see you, and how much I cared about you. The spark ignited inside me when I realized you were all my friends! She turned her attention to Nightmare Moon below them. You see, Nightmare Moon, when those elements are ignited by the spark that resides in the heart of us all, it creates the 6th element, and that element is magic! As if they'd been waiting for those words, the stars spiraled faster around each of the ponies, each stone producing a flash of light as they became 5 golden necklaces. A 6th stream streaked into the air to circle Twilight's head, where it took the shape of a headdress. The individual beacons of light that surrounded the ponies now came together and focused themselves into what only could be called a living rainbow. Everybody say it with me now! Taste the rainbow, motherfucker! It rose from the 6, then came crashing down on Nightmare Moon, who was still too shocked to so much as speak until she realized it was far too late. It swiftly wrapped around her, eliciting one last booming "No!" from the mare. The sound echoed off into the distance. Slowly, the glow of the elements faded, and the last of the rainbow running its course is streaking off into the sky as the ponies gently lit on the rooftop. For a moment, everything was calm and silent. Lying amid her scattered trappings was Nightmare Moon, but she had changed considerably. She was now only a head taller than Twilight herself, and her coat had faded from black to a softer blue. Her mane and tail were now composed of normal hair, instead of wisps of living night. Slowly, she opened her eyes. What? She pushed herself to her hose, then looked down at herself in awe. Seeing the change that had come over her, her head whipped up to the ponies before her. You! She hissed, moving haughtily forward. Wrath echoed instant to her face. But as she took another step, then another, that look of hatred began to dissolve. First, she looked puzzled. Then, impossibly calm. I'm not angry anymore, she observed. That hasn't happened for longer than I can remember. Twilight nodded, moving forward to meet her. That's what harmony means, she said, smiling. It's peace. You don't need to be angry, see? Nightmare didn't answer right away. Instead, she bowed her head for a moment, then sank to her knees, shuddering. Twilight reached out to her, but stopped when she felt the world around her shake. Every pony braced themselves, except for Nightmare, who shot to her hooves, looking around wildly. Oh no! We need to go! Now! Now? What's happening? Twilight asked, barely audible over the roar. This pocket dimension was sustained by the power of Nightmare Moon, the Alicorn explained. Now that the power is gone, it will collapse. If we don't leave now, we'll all be trapped in the space between spaces forever! All 6 ponies listened and gasped. Twilight swore her to face the rest. Blossom Forth, Daring, you two take Auntie and Octavia, go! She said quickly. Trixie and I will figure out a way to... Twilight found that thought cut off, as a hoof grabbed around her waist. Nightmare Moon pulled her close to her body, and with her other forehoof, did the same to Trixie. I will see you to safety, she said, immediately before plunging from the roof, spreading her wings halfway down to take flight. Daring Do grabbed Octavia, and Blossom Forth snatched Orange Sherbet. They took off, diving to fly as quickly as their boarders would allow. In moments, they passed a much more weighed-down Alicorn, a falling skyscraper narrowly missing them, and Nightmare barely had time to dodge backward. I can't make it! She cried, straining to get clear of another collapsing building. With both of you, I don't have the speed to avoid them all! Twilight squinted at the boundary, a spot where the city was cut off by a barrier with the appearance of a night sky. She followed the line up, up. I've got it! Twilight exclaimed, pointing. You won't have to dodge! If you fly up! Nightmare seemed caught entirely off guard by this idea. She nodded. All right, it's our best bet, she said, angling herself straight up and flapping her wings frantically to pick up speed. They climbed higher in a desperate bid to outrun the collapse. Glancing back down, Twilight could see that the street was being overtaken by an inky, starlit blackness. She bit her lip and looked up instead. Every moment they drew closer to where she assumed the boundary was. But the blackness was approaching below, faster and even faster. Nightmare's breathing had become heavy and ragged. Twilight squeezed her eyes shut and let out a scream of terror. Beside her, Trixie was doing much the same. Then, the rumbling stopped. Twilight opened her eyes and was greeted by the light of the museum. The Alicorn carried her arced slowly over the heads of the ponies who had arrived before them, and landed near a corridor with a soft thud. A second later, the orb of darkness folded in on itself with a disastrous crashing sound and disappeared. As Nightmare released the unicorns and staggered to the wall, leaning against it and exhausted, the ponies checked themselves over, making sure they were in one piece, then pausing to admire each other's new necklaces. Trixie adjusted her hat and cape, then adopted a casual posture, as though nothing at all happened. Octavia reclaimed her cello, seeming comforted by the feel of it in her hose. Orange Sherbet hesitated for a second, then reached up to feel her mane. It was done up as exactly as it had been before they entered the museum. Her eyes went wide, and a silent plea reached across her mouth as she continued to feel her until her hoof hit something. She didn't need to see it to know what it was, and she sank to the ground, whispering something to herself and smiling. Outside, the faint red-orange tinge of sunrise was visible through the window. Slowly, this fact dawned on Daring. My museum! She shouted, racing to the window and throwing it open. Leaned out, and looking around the city with awe, feeling the mild breeze of the summer morning. Indeed, said a voice behind her, that is the power of the elements of harmony. Slowly, all 6 turned to the door. There, almost in silhouette against the brighter light of the corridor, was a great white Alicorn, of regal bearing, wearing a golden crown and a proud smile. Princess Celestia! Twilight rushed to her mentor, pressing herself against the larger mare's chest. Twilight Sparkle, my faithful student. Celestia greeted her, nuzzling her tenderly. I knew you could do it. But, Twilight protested, looking at her, you told me it was an old pony's tale. I told you you needed to make some friends, nothing more. Celestia replied with a serene smile. I saw the signs of Nightmare Moon's return, and I knew it was you who had the magic inside to defeat her. But you could not unleash it until you let true friendship into your heart. Speaking of which... Her gaze slowly shifted across the group to rest upon the 7th. Princess Luna! The Alicorn in the corner flinched and slowly turned around. Celestia approached her, wrinkled berry seeming to soften as slightly as she did. It has been 1,000 years since I have seen you like this. Time to put our differences behind us. Nightmare, or Luna, seemed to cower a bit, but stopped as she felt Celestia's hoof on her shoulder. After everything, it would be really so quick to forgive. I forgave you a long time ago, and tonight you've proven I was correct to do so. I saw you help them escape, Luna. You showed the true nobility and compassion of the sister I've always known. Please, return to my side so we can rule together as we always were meant to. Luna looked away for a moment, before abruptly rushing closer and pressing her face into Celestia's coat. I am so sorry! She cried out. Celestia didn't say anything. She held her little sister close, comfortably, as if to assure her that the past 1,000 years were only some bad dream. A happy silence descended over them. That silence was broken a few seconds later by the sound of Trixie clearing her throat. Ahem! Does that mean we are heroes now? Epilogue. Friends in high places. Twilight paced about the library anxiously, waiting for any news. It was as if a clock was ticking in the back of her mind, almost like the threat of Nightmare Moon looming all over again. Trixie had insisted she was be allowed to handle things. At her urging, they had all gone their separate ways. For Twilight, that meant returning to the library, to pack her things and reflect on the nightmare's ordeal behind them. Twilight, Spike interrupted. You okay? You've been out of it all morning. Twilight turned to face Spike. Oh, sorry, she said. I guess I've just had my mind on something. Are you sure you're ready? He asked. No, I'm not, Twilight responded morosely. But it's going to happen, so I better get ready. It's not like it's the end of the world or anything. There was a knock on the door at the makeshift bedroom. Twilight shifted her attention to it. Come in! Blossomforth poked her head aside, grinning ear to ear. Hey, Twilight, she said with a remarkable lilt. Every pony's heading for Central Park. You better hurry. Her face fell slightly as she saw the looks on Twilight. I mean, you know, it'll be fun, she offered. Twilight bowed her head. Thanks, Blossomforth. I'll be right there. Slowly, Blossomforth nodded and stepped out into the entrance, waiting for Twilight to join her. Together, with Spike perched on Twilight's back, they trotted down the stairs and toward the park. Trixie was waiting for them at the entrance to Central Park with a grin that could be seen from a mile away. A small crowd of eager ponies gathered before her. Near the front, many of the attendees had even more eager colts or fillies atop their heads. Twilight gratefully made her way toward the show pony. Good of you to join us, she announced. Trixie has finished all the preparations, as only Trixie could have done. What are you talking about? Twilight began, only to be interrupted by the rumbling of a motor. A few motorized platforms rolled toward her, towering and brilliantly decorated. Once Mayor Tux approved my plan. Getting everything together was fool's play, Trixie commented smugly. And now I present to you Princess Celestia and Princess Luna. The alcorns alit suddenly on the lead platform, on which 2 thrones were situated. They waved, grinning as the crowd cheered. We're on the second floor, Trixie added. After a second, the thought tricked into Twilight's mind. What? You mean me? I don't need any parades, I just... You just saved the world, Trixie said. Today is much about celebrating you as the princesses. She's right, you know, a voice beside Twilight said. She turned her head to see Daring Do step out of the crowd. You're too modest. A little exposure will be good for you. Orange Sherbet and Octavia moved to stand beside Daring. Twilight looked around at the 5. They were all nodding encouragingly. Octavia gave a small bow, gesturing with a smile to Twilight. There was a long pause, and then Twilight smiled as well. Thank you all, she said quietly, for being here. With that, she turned and climbed onto the second float. Blossomforth giggled happily, before fluttering after her. Daring Do offered a hoof to help the earth ponies up, and before sailing into place on herself. Once the rest were in position, Trixie gave her grandest stage bow to the assembled ponies, cast a smokescreen, and leapt up as well. And with that, we commence! Trixie declared. The floats began moving, rolling out of the park and down the street as the lively music commenced. They chatted happily as they passed cheering crowds along the road. Every so often, one of them caught Twilight looking uneasy, and asked what was respond. In response, she would sink herself out of it and smile again. The procession passed through Equinus Square, accompanied by deafening cheers. Confetti streamed down from above, as throngs of delighted ponies gathered to watch. Tiny fireworks burst around the floats, igniting the paper to burn in a rainbow of brilliant hues for a fraction of a second, before it extinguished itself and blew away. All of Manehattan had turned out to see this. Ahead on the first float, Celestia moved her seat behind Luna's. The smaller princess looked stunned by the reactions of ponies, and reassured by her sister's gentle hoof on her shoulder. As Luna raised a hoof to wave meekly to the crowd, a bouquet fell directly into it. She looked at it for a moment, then up to the crowd to find the thrower, a young colt bouncing excitedly as he cheered at the top of his voice. She smiled and blew a kiss to the colt, who cheered even harder, his parents now having little difficulty keeping him from leaping onto the float. The six of them fell silent for a moment, their attention drawn to the simple gesture. "Well, there's another princess now," Twilight said. "I guess that's something I'm going to have to adjust for." "Who cares if there's another princess?" Spike replied with a shrug. 2, 3, as long as they're good at what they're doing. And they are. Then I say, the more the merrier.
"That's all well and good,"
Trixie said flatly. "But 4 is right out!" So, Daring idly stirring her milkshake, now that we've done all this, what's next? You know, now that we're heroes and everything. The cafe was quiet, the late morning sun providing a soft light. The other patrons seemed to keep their distance, looking upon the princess at the head of the table with reverent awe.
"Well,"
Silvert mused,
I've been thinking of a feast."
Trixie cleared her throat, prompting Sherbert to glare at her.
"I, the great Imperial Trixie, will soon embark on a colossal Celestia tour, displaying the powers that only the element of magic could harness."
The rest of the party stared at her for a moment, before Daring jabbed a hoof in her direction. "You know, this probably qualifies as pointing out the obvious, but your element is laughter. I hope you're not planning to say otherwise." She gave Trixie a warning look. Trixie flushed slightly.
Slip of the tongue. I meant," she glanced around the table. "Oh yes, you'll all come with me, of course. It'll be the greatest show in the Celestia!"
Daring's expression softened slightly, as she nodded. "Well, okay, I guess we could do that sometime. Blossom?" Her eyes shifted to the other Pegasus. "How about you?"
"Oh, I don't know,"
Blossom first said.
"I'm a simple mare with simple dreams. I don't need to do anything big just because of something like this. I'll be content with just saying, a park named after me."
Octavia rolled her eyes. "Thy modesty's a candle to thy merit," she said, "and I intend to do the same thing I've always done, play my cello. Though, perhaps, now I will have a bigger audience."
Certainly I hope so."
Sherbert added.
"Your music's always been inspirational. The more ponies that hear it, the better."
Octavia blushed, then looked at Twilight.
"And what are you going to?"
Twilight looked around, and Octavia silenced herself. The earth pony put a hoof on Twilight's shoulder, her look inquiring where she couldn't speak. "I'm going back to Camelot," Twilight said, with a slight chill in her voice. "I was only here for the celebration. Now that it's over—" She trailed off. Celestia, concerned by the shift in her pupil's demeanor, leaned closer. "Is something bothering you, my faithful student?" "Princess," Twilight replied, "before you sent me here, I never cared about friends at all. Now that I finally know what I was missing, and I just have to give it up." She spoke. She didn't look at her mentor, Rather, her eyes fell on each of her friends in turn. Auntie was carefully attempting to mute her troubled expression. Daring looked almost scared. Octavia still gave Twilight the greatly concerned look. Phosphor teared up greatly. Trixie looked hurt, until Twilight looked directly at her, when she promptly turned her head and tried to pretend it was no big deal. There was a moment of silence now. Celestia surveyed the group, lowered her head and thought for a moment, then chuckled quietly. Spike, take a letter. You know what comes next, folks. Cue the end credits! My little pony, my little pony. Ah, my little pony. I used to wonder what friendship could be. My little pony, until you all shared its magic with me. Great discoveries, tricks galore, a rich slice of life, a hopeful score. But in carrots, it's an easy feat, and magic makes it all complete. You have my little ponies. Do you all know you are my very true friends? It could only happen on the Hub. This was the Manehattan verse, as done by Jackie Papercut, presented by Hasbro. Live read by Marcel Hartford user. Wait. Guys, if this is an alternate universe where I decide to read the Manehattan verse instead of the Lunaverse, then who's my boss? Who do you think, Mr. Art User? Oh no, not you. I thought I could. You'll never escape the great and powerful one. No! Huh? Okay, guys. Let's be a little serious here. This story, once again, helps to demonstrate one of the better points of fanfiction in the growing community, and why I love writing for this community, and why I love reading so many stories, and why I have such a huge backlog of fanfics I want to read. Take a good look at this. While the middle part, where Nightmare Moon shows up, and Twilight's big moment were very similar to each other, it was still different. And this is not the first time it happened. No. Just by taking the central premise of the two episodes, many multiple verses come out. And they're all done in such a way that I bet I could probably have a little marathon of all of my favorites, of which this is it, right here for you guys. And I wouldn't have told it the same way twice. As a matter of fact, we sort of have been doing that for the past 6 months now, haven't we? I mean, besides having adventures in the set, first, in the universe, we've been doing stories from the Shimmer and Manehattan. And look at them. The Manehattan verse isn't exactly like the Shimmer verse, and Sunset's verse isn't like the Manehattan verse. They're both different. And they are still changed just enough so you can still feel like it's its own unique story. And what a fun tale it is. I've been doing something lately with the whole different universes. I've been trying my best to categorize what I think the different universes are like in my head. If the main verse is kind of like the best, the main heroes are the powerful ones, the universe to me is, of course, the badass normals. Because, let's face it, these guys aren't exactly super strong, super fast, or got a badass stare. Oh, Charlie's awesome, but you know what I mean. This world, for the Manehattan verse, I had to say, would have to be the calm ones, the more... what's the appropriate term? I guess I would have to say the more worker-related ones. What I mean is that these guys have higher jobs that they need to work on than what the main or Luniverse cast does. A lot more labor-intensive stuff, like, Sherbert's got her work. I guess you could kind of say it's kind of, I don't want to say sitcom-y, but it sort of has that type of feel. But that's not a bad thing. This is still fun. It's got a whole bunch of adventure to it. As a matter of fact, we haven't even done my favorite story this whole entire verse. No. That story, of course, would involve the best member of the Luniverse, and I'll get to that. One of the things that always appeals to me about any of the alternate verses has got to be the tests, because you always got to figure out a way to fix it and make the test new. Otherwise, we'd just be sitting through there. This also helps us demonstrate the basics of what type of characters we got for each one. And boy, do we have that. Because none of these bearers are exactly like who they are. Daring Do is definitely not Applejack, as her element, while it's still a basic trust from honesty, it's also about being open with herself, allowing her to show that, yes, I understand what I need to do, and allowing herself to express her own personal emotions. While Octavia's is definitely not our little Fluttershy's. Oh, I need to tell you this, guys. When I first read this a couple of years ago, the tests for Octavia and Blossomforth were changed. Octavia had to deal with the Chimera using her music to soothe the creature, while Blossomforth called the crowd. I don't know why it was changed, and quite frankly, I don't find one better or the other. Although I did ask other people, and they seem to prefer this remake over that one. My only question is, why the change? Because, and I've looked, I didn't find anything about why this huge change in character. But with the tests that were given, Octavia shows her kindness, her understanding of others, and how you can use music to make other ponies feel good about themselves and soft, and using her caring potential to its fullest. While Blossomforth shows a difference in trust, hers was fate. While Daring was trust in others, hers was in trust in herself. Hers was faith in others, showing that Blossom was willing to go out and do what she needed to. And Blossom is really goofy and silly. And of course, my favorite member of the Luniverse, the one who is completely awesome, the one who I can't seem to help but love no matter what I'm reading, the great and powerful Trixie! Yes, I just simply love her test. It was hilarious, it was fun, it was silly, and she quickly became my favorite member of the Luniverse. Not that Orange Sherbert, with her sacrifice to give up hope or her kindness, is any less. Actually, I do like Orange Sherbert a lot because she is kind of like Dizzy in that she has a family of her own. It's just that she's kind of rich. So yeah, in case you haven't figured it out, my favorite Luniverse story is the one my favorite Manehattan first story is the one that centers around Trixie and her family. Because it also has one of my favorite fanfic villains of all time in it, Checker Monarch. Speaking of which, I've really got to release that one fic. I suppose it's kind of fate that my anniversary for the whole entire Luniverse came around the same time we just had the 100th episode where we celebrated the background ponies. Because as I said on the comments about it, what I love about the episode was that it was just this big one love letter to the fans. And a reminder of what I love about this fandom. Of why this fandom is so great. And it isn't just the fact that the show is a well-made show for girls that can also appeal to older audiences. It is just that the comedy, the story, the characters, and the heartwarming moments are all well written. It's the fans. There's a reason why these and the characters. The characters, well, there's a reason why we've created so many of these universes. From Spike being a pony to an adventure in Manehattan, where the city feels like a character in itself, to the Luniverse. It's because the characters are so well developed, and so interesting, and so independently designed, like Lyra, Octavia, Trixie, Cerberus, and so many others, that it's so, the ability for us to respond to them and be reflective towards our own abilities and relatable, that we can create such epic stories about these guys and make their own stories unique, giving out their own individual adventures that range from something soft and sweet, like, say, does Stinky making a Mother's Day trip, or something grand and glorious, like, say, a whole entire alternate universe set around a completely different city. And why is that? Because we have such an awesome fandom full of creative people who come out with, well, 30 to 40 pieces of artwork a day. Awesome writers who come out with such brilliant stories, sometimes ranging in the hundreds. 90% of which are readable, 9% are excellent, and 1% is superb. And of course, multiple universes that I never feel the same way about. This is one of them. When I read this universe, I feel like I'm just watching a fun little short adventure about a couple of people living in a high-rise. This is nowhere better explored than in that last moment when Twilight has the moment. The big moment where she says, "You are all my friends." No matter what, I never get tired of that moment. It is brilliant. And watching this little fic shows why. Because it reminds us that friendship is indeed magic, but so are the stories in the multiple universes. And so is this wonderful little tale. Thank you for joining me for the 1-year anniversary. Who knows, maybe for the 2-year anniversary of the Luniverse, I might do flip side. Or I just might give you guys all a chance to enjoy the Dassiverse. Well, back to the grind next week. We're still going to do all the awesomeness that is the Book of Harmony. Friendship. I'll see you next time.